Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. And before we get started, I feel it only fair to address the elephant in the room. I am not a games journalist. I have never claimed to be, nor have I ever affirmed any assertion that I am one. In fact, in the past, I've gone out of my way to directly avoid that comparison. Just so we're clear, I am just a mook with a mic and an overinflated sense of ethics who happens to love video games. Nothing more and nothing less. However, I do feel that in my previous video surrounding the situation with OPNoobs, I did everyone involved a bit of a disservice. I made up my mind and pressed home my point in that regard, and in the doing so, I at least let my viewers down a little. You see, I came out swinging with a predetermined opinion, and that's not what I'm typically known for. And while yes, I am a bit self-righteous and exceptionally arrogant most of the time, I've always worked best, and I feel I've done the best, when I came at a situation like this from a standpoint of not tackling the subject that a topic focuses on, but rather to tackle the topic in the context of the subject and allow you, the viewer, to make up your own minds. Not to subject you to my own opinion and ideals to the exclusion of all else. Also, I admit that I have not been in this industry for long, just a couple of years. As such, I know that there is a lot I don't know and that I have a lot to learn. As that is the case, there was one aspect that I should have covered but I didn't, and that is to actually ask editors and writers within the traditional media how these situations are usually handled, and having not done that, I feel that I didn't perform due diligence in that regard. I've since corrected that, and while it has only served to validate my opinions, it's still good to have discussed with and been told actual information from editors and other writers within the industry so I can at least relate a better informed opinion to everyone. So taking all of that into account, let's back up and cover this a little bit more carefully, and we'll also take the time to address Fred Brizzi's response to the situation in exhaustive detail, because I feel like doing exhaustive detail. First, let's cover what I did find out from all of the phone calls, Discord chats, and Twitter DMs that I spent the majority of my day engaged in. And that is, let's identify the role of the editor first and foremost, because I've seen some confusion in that regard, and that was my primary focus here. Now, it seems that many people think the editor edits, as in makes changes too, and while yes, that does sometimes occur, their primary focus and job is in fact to act more like what you see with a project manager in other industries. The editor is typically the liaison for the writers. They help keep the writers on task and make sure they remain focused, perform fact-checking, issue corrections for factual errors, and generally help the writers along. Also, when it comes to news-focused pieces, they are supposed to help make sure that the writer's story is interesting, engaging, and ultimately unbiased, at least in a perfect world. We all know that is rarely the case these days. In the world of reviews, things are, of course, handled a little differently. The reason behind that as reviews aren't treated as factual articles, they're treated as an opinion piece. This is due to the fact that the critic writing the article needs to not only relate the core mechanics of the game, but also their impressions of the game itself. As that is highly subjective and changes from critic to critic, treating reviews as an opinion piece is quite proper and fitting. As such, I've been led to understand editors traditionally take great pains to change as little as possible within a review, and they also typically do so while maintaining an open dialogue with the writer. The intent there is to make certain that the review itself and the intent behind the statements are not altered, and the point that the writer was trying to make still gets made. Typically, the editors point things out and let the writers make the changes themselves. And to quote one person who asked to remain off the record as so as not to go through the red tape to clear things up before speaking to me, said, quote, "As for changing the content on the review, you generally want to have a conversation with the author as you're doing it. Like if they don't talk about something that is important to the game, or if they're being extremely vague about a point, I let them know, and most of the time they're able to rewrite it themselves. My job is definitely not to inject my own opinion in the review, it's to help the writers communicate their ideas." And when asked about altering review scores, I again got a pretty universal response across the board. Typically, if a critic gives a game a 1 or a 10, extra editorial review is given, which is basically challenging the writer to make sure that either extreme is actually justified. Also, if the writer puts out a review that doesn't match the score they give, then the editor would question them. This would be the equivalent of a lukewarm review where there were some UI issues, a couple of crashes, and an unremarkable story being granted a 9. Then it would be the editor's job to step in and make sure to review that with the writer. And all of that makes complete sense to me and sounds extremely equitable and is a pretty fair methodology. So with that firmly in our minds, let's recap the last video and the allegations that were made within it. We had a review written for a video game that cast the game in a very negative light, the writer stating that the game deserved a score of a 3. The person who calls themselves the presidente of the site states that the review was rewritten and that it was up to the writer, Tony, whether or not he still wanted his name attached. This was done with seemingly no involvement or engagement between an editor and the writer in the slightest. Also, after that rewrite was completed, the review score for the game was raised from a 3 to a 6. Shortly after that, Tony had found that all of his other reviews had been removed from the site, which is extremely problematic as it seems that all of the writers work for free. This is more commonly known as working for exposure, and for the purposes of clarification, the aspect that the writers were unpaid did not make it into my previous video. And there is also the fact that during that same time frame, the site became a Metacritic-approved site. Those are the basic facts in a nutshell that were outlined within my previous video, backed with emails shared between Tony and the president, Fred Brizzi. And no, I'm not cheeky by calling him Presidente, that's what it says on the OPNoobs website. And now that that's out of the way and everyone's up to speed, let's continue on. In response to my admittedly extremely biased video that was released last night, Fred Brizzi released a response to that video on his website, and we will go through that and offer counter-arguments and discussions as we go along. Might as well sit back and relax, or maybe pause and take a bathroom break because this is going to take a bit to work through. Now first, you know you're in for an interesting time when the person writing the response decides to start things off by attacking your grammar. This is traditionally done in order to make oneself appear to be an intellectual authority over their opponent and provides oneself with a psychological advantage. Unfortunately here, that's not really going to work too well. Fred Brizzi starts us off by stating, "Editor's note, SidAlpha, the grammatically correct version of your YouTube title should read, OPNoobs cite guilty of review manipulation and betraying their writers. You're welcome." And as Fred really wants to go down this path, fine. Let's do just that. You see, Fred, you would be correct if you were using the passive tense or what is called the past participle, in which case the correct usage would indeed be betraying. However, as I was in fact using a present tense verbiage, or what is also known as the perfect participle, which in that instance adding the ing to the word betray would not be appropriate. Nice try, A+ for effort, but you'll have to do better than that. Next, Fred states, "Watch it, enjoy the dramatic spins, and allow me to defend our site and all the talented writers behind it." And while yes, I was very much attacking your site and its ethical standards, I was in no way attacking your writers. And while I appreciate your desire to form a united front and make sure that you reinforce a tribalistic mentality, something that has actually proven to be rather effective given the number of your writing staff accusing me of slander within the comments of my video, however, I have no beef with your writers. No, the whole point of contention is with the manipulation of reviews, the deletion of reviews for writers working for exposure, and the artificial alteration of review scores, something that you yourself actually admit to later in your response. But moving on. Game critics have a tough road in this industry. The ability to earn a living is virtually impossible. SidAlpha, you are correct. I'm not making money, I'm losing it. Don't believe me? Call my wife. The overpowered noobs have been operating since September 2014 at a deficit. We have never made a cent, much less $1 off of a review, and we invest our personal time and incomes daily, with no prospects of generating profits whatsoever. And I can appreciate that sentiment. I too started my YouTube channel from nothing, investing vast quantities of time and money into making something of my channel. And while I don't entirely sympathize with the state of your site and its unfortunate financial situation, I do empathize with it. Why? Because we are a community of passionate PC gamers who write in support of the independent scene. We believe they keep the industry creative and AAA studios from falling into recipes and cliches the way cinema has over time. We write to provide much-needed coverage, good or bad, to talented developers who simply aren't getting enough from the mainstream press, often for the reasons that they don't carry enough weight in the gaming scene to bring anything of significant value to bigger sites. For the record, we are not ones to criticize mainstream press. In fact, I personally admire their production output and the quality of the writing. They are a source of inspiration to us, and we hope to continue improving our content so that one day we might be as respected as they are among the industry. Having said this, we do feel that they could provide much more coverage for the little fishes in the sea, especially those talented enough to deserve it. And again, that is something to which I empathize with very strongly. I have covered the indie scene in order to help provide visibility for those that I can and that I feel are deserving of greater attention, while calling out problems within the games industry that I feel needs a light shone upon it. Fred continues to say, "What happens when the publications you work for not only make significant changes to both your review and score, but then eliminates all of your work by deleting it from the site, firing you and a host of other writers, all following in the coattails of being admitted as a confirmed Metacritic site? We started like so many other entrepreneurial team on Earth, from the dirt, and with nothing other than an uphill battle ahead of us. I recall the long nights, the teams breaking down, the personal time away from family when my newborn was ready for his dad, but I wasn't, at least not half as much as I wanted to. Personally, I had and I still must build something, and both my colleagues and I knew it would take a tremendous amount of work and commitment to make that happen. Early on and all the way until mid-2016, the writing on OPNoobs was less than stellar. We had to start somewhere, right? Getting the ball rolling was the priority at the time, though, and meeting gamers from all walks of life so as to create a talent community that would bring a breath of fresh air and a real support base to a booming indie scene. Simply click on this link of upcoming games this week and also take a look at the sheer amount of games waiting for some attention from press. Sadly, there is so little coverage to support them. We always felt that was a shame, and I hope you, the independent thinker, will agree. And while it's nice that you took the time to pat yourself on the back, God knows I do it myself far too often, you didn't actually dispute anything at all there. The only hint of a possible response in there comes from the single sentence in the middle. Early on and all the way until mid-2016, the writing on OPNoobs was less than stellar. Also, I have to ask you this. If you were unimpressed with the writing on your channel, why did you accept it? Surely when you brought on writers, you reviewed examples of their work, yes? Why would you produce content on your site that you would be unwilling to hang your hat on? This makes me wonder if you were far more focused on quantity as opposed to quality. And while I know that within the media industry, the balance between the two is a never-ending balancing act, that still makes me feel as if your care in that regard lapsed. If you're willing to nuke some 200+ reviews, as you said in an email to Tony, then that was very much a form of work to which you held little to no regard. Which is also an interesting conundrum considering you emailed that very same writer in June of last year complimenting him on his work and stating that he was, quote, becoming a favorite writer to some on the team. So what happened? Was there a fall from grace? Also, in your next rebuttal, you state, "You fired people, you capitalist, you." They were all, for the record, volunteers. Not employees, but volunteers. Hence the inflammatory word in your video, fired, is grossly incorrect. You influence people, SidAlpha, and hats off to you for being successful, but please check your facts if you want to be respected in the long run. And yes, I hate to say it, but there is such a thing as good writing versus poor writing. So by this implication, those 200+ pieces that also include all of Tony's collective works for the site were somehow deemed to be subpar. This seems to be at odds with the email you wrote in June. Again, something doesn't quite add up there. Now let me walk you through this butchery called business standards. In 2015, we applied to Metacritic to no avail. We did not get the accreditation, and frankly, rightfully so. The quality in the writing just wasn't there. This means that at the turn of 2016, we decided to make some real tough decisions in the writing department, letting go of people we had come to know as friends. At the time, we dismissed far more writers than we did at the turn of 2017. Towards the end of the year, we applied again. Metacritic considered us once more and this time recognized how much we had evolved. They credited OPNoobs, and yes, it did bring tears to my eyes. So much work, so much dedication. The naysayers were proven wrong, and we were at last rewarded for persevering. Now, Tony Villario was still around, among a few others whom, albeit being good people, Tony obviously excluded, we felt did not have the skill level to carry us forward in this new era. Most accepted the fact that we had to bid farewell, but he didn't, and he certainly did a good job at taking his frustration into a platform where he might be heard. Sorry, Tony, I still wish you well. I'll just hang a lantern on your stating that Tony is not a good person and move on. Regardless of all of this, for a bunch of people that volunteered for your site, you suddenly dumped their collective works. An extremely shitty thing to do to a bunch of writers working for exposure. This ensures 100% that there is no exposure to be had, and is an extremely poor way to treat your writers. It actually makes me wonder how in the world those writers are sticking up for you and accusing me of slander in my comments section when some of them should be wondering if they can expect the same treatment. If all of their hard work will be wiped from the site, unable to be used in their portfolios. Working on exposure means that they should be granted the ability to make use of that exposure to help find paid work somewhere else if and when that time comes. They can't very well do that if you wipe their work from existence. And while some would argue that it would be unrealistic to keep reviews on your site for the remainder of the site's lifespan, I think that it would be more than realistic to at least allow a period of time for those writers to at least be able to retrieve an archive to be able to use in finding work. And being you claim to care so much about your writers, perhaps a to whom it may concern letter verifying the authenticity of those reviews. I know that would be more difficult and take more effort on your part, but it would at least give them something. To simply wipe them out of existence in the fashion that you did leaves those writers with nothing but ashes and dust for their efforts in helping to build your site to where it is now. Fred continues, also, not to get too philosophical on you, but yeah. The immigrant in me saw the accreditation and appreciated the big win it symbolized as a true expression of American meritocracy. I'm glad there are people like the ones I won't name running parts of a company as influential as Metacritic. People like him make the world go round. They recognize hard work and a job done right, regardless of who you are and who your daddy is. And I hope that our small and humble success be a source of inspiration to other gamers trying to get something up and running. You should, because if you've got the resilience and stamina for it, this country will acknowledge and reward you for it. That's what makes it so great. And that is a very odd sentiment coming from you, as you very quickly denied that exact same chance and consideration to those writers you let go. They don't get the opportunity to be recognized for their hard work that they did to get you to the point where you were accredited by Metacritic. No, they were very much cast aside when they were no longer needed. American dream indeed. Fred continues on, you changed the review score. Most of the time, it's to bring it down. No more 9s and 10s at every turn, please. Yes, but before publishing it, and we do this all the time, before publishing it. That's because we have a strict grading scale, which, by the way, is much tougher than most other game sites. It is our belief that games are overhyped, and 9s and 10s are far too numerous. The 2017 grading scale saw some further adjustments in that direction. Now, if a writer doesn't understand our grading, we look at what he's saying. Then we adjust his score based on how his writing reads. We communicate that to them, and they're, for the most part, Tony obviously excluded, appreciative of it. First, a comment on the review score system itself. I like it. It's actually pretty much the same scale that most YouTubers use when reviewing a game. It's essentially the same to what I used when I still bothered giving a score to video games before I came to the realization that I really didn't need it and it offered nothing to the review itself, but that's just the format of my videos. That said, you do admit to changing review scores, and that in and of itself is one of the 3 major problems I personally have with this whole situation, and it's something that you do not seem to grasp the concept of. You see, while you seem to think that you have a tougher grading scale, that would imply that you lowered the score of the game, whereas it would seem that the score was increased from a 3 to a 6. And that was after an extensive rewrite of the review that, when comparing it to the original, does very much change the points and intent of the review, where the score was then raised to match the written content of the new review. Did the editor that performed what was essentially a rewrite even play the game? Did they work with the person who did to make sure that the ideas contained within the original were correctly portrayed? It would seem not. And the fact that you adjusted the scores and then discussed this with them is as I've gathered, not industry best practice, where the score is changed to fit the writer's review in collaboration with the writer, not as some form of approval after the fact. That is, by its definition, review manipulation, and that is what some people do not seem to understand. Fred then posts some screenshots to help showcase his journalistic integrity that I will have on the screen unobstructed for a few moments if you would like to pause and read the email snips yourself, followed by the statement, "At the end of the day, I'll let you be the judge of who we are and what we stand for. I do hope you'll take a step back before following the herd that points a finger. I commented on YouTube, but the crowd didn't believe I was the president. That's how disconnected the press is from the community, not us. So if you have any comments or concerns, you can always email me. Always happy to chat." And I as well hope everyone studies Fred's response and the statements made in both this video and the previous one, and please do come to your own conclusions as to whether this is simply a misunderstood site or someone who is guilty of review manipulation and screwing over the writers of over 200 reviews. But of course, Fred had to leave it off with one last dig at little old me, in which he said, "Last but not least, I invite SidAlpha to debate me on Twitch. I won't run away from OPNoobs. Our team deserves far better from me than that. So SidAlpha, if you're man enough, come face me." If I'm man enough? Really, Fred? You had to go with the whole grade school bullshit at the very end? Why? What purpose would it serve? Do you really think that calling my manhood into question would goad me into debating you in some form of open format? Let me say this to everyone, especially those commenters who saw that last statement already and are extremely excited thinking this will be the next debate similar to the Romines and Jim Sterling. I'm not Jim. I never claimed to be and I never try to be. As that is the case, I also don't share Jim's morbid curiosity that seemingly propelled him into that ridiculous interview. Frankly, for me to debate Fred, I would have to respect him in some way, and judging from the intellectual dishonesty I saw in his response, I have no reason at this time to respect him enough to grant his request. Now, if he were to come back with a response that was less full of himself and more able to address the actual issues here, then I would probably consider it. As long as he left out the jabs at my intellect and my manhood. Resorting to tactics such as those in order to elicit an emotional response as opposed to reasoned discourse will never earn my respect. I don't care who you are. So my response to the request for a debate or whatever you wanted to happen, Fred, is a no. Not until you earn it. In the meantime, I will go back to other things, and I suggest you take a look at your business practices. And as always, everyone else is more than welcome to let us know what they think down in the comments below. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.